When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it didn't just threaten our health. It also shone a light on the invisible glue of community, social infrastructure. Schools, libraries, cafes, gyms, parks, houses of worship, all the places that draw people together were suddenly closed or restricted. For months, communities around the world lived in a kind of experiment. What happens when social infrastructure is weakened? At first, it seemed manageable. People worked from home, streamed entertainment, ordered groceries online, but the cracks soon showed. Isolation rose, trust eroded, loneliness deepened. Without the small daily interactions like a chat at the library desk, a pickup game at the park, or a shared table at a cafe, our sense of belonging started to thin. I was 3 months pregnant when the world shut down in 2020. I watched from my living room window as the world outside slowed. Like everyone else, we adapted, but there was a cost. My mental health definitely struggled. I was navigating life with a baby and toddler without the village that parenting regularly requires. And then one spring day, my partner came home excited because he had just met other adults with small children at the neighborhood playground just down the street from where we lived. A playground that early in the pandemic had been shut down. Over the next few weeks, we ran into these families again and again and started to meet others. Some of them we knew from before the lockdowns, but many had new young children now. In the evenings, we could always count on at least one other family to be at the playground after dinner, which is a saving grace for the time before bed when children have energy to burn and adults are too tired to do much of anything. We started to build friendships as we stood around the playground, watching our kids conquer the aging playground equipment. To say I was excited feels like an understatement. The truth is, I didn't know how much I was missing a sense of community until I finally found it again. As Easter approached that year, one of our neighbors organized an Easter egg hunt in the park. We were told, bring eggs to hide or not, but come and join us. There must have been about 25 adults and kids in the park early that spring morning. Adults groggily sipped on coffee while children screamed with delight as they gathered brightly colored foil-wrapped candies. In my memory, that was a turning point in the recovery of my sense of community that had been so eroded over the pandemic. Maybe you've had a moment like that. The pandemic revealed something we usually take for granted. Social infrastructure, such as the playground down the street, isn't extra. It's essential. It's what turns neighborhoods into communities, strangers into neighbors, and individuals into a public. When it falters, the social fabric frays. Welcome to Community by Design, exploring social infrastructure in Waterloo Region. I'm Jay Harrison. Over 5 episodes, we're going to look at social infrastructure in Waterloo Region, what it is, and why we need it. We're exploring this topic on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral people, as well as the Haldimand Tract, land promised to the Six Nations that runs 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. We're grateful to the traditional, original, and contemporary Indigenous stewards of this land that is the foundation of our social infrastructure. In this first episode, we're asking a deceptively simple question. What is social infrastructure? We're also going to look at libraries as one type of social infrastructure. It's a term that sounds technical and maybe even a little abstract, but social infrastructure shapes almost everything about our daily lives, from the parks we walk through to the neighbors we greet, to whether we feel like we belong in our community. To help us unpack this somewhat academic concept, we spoke with Dr. Troy Glover from the University of Waterloo's Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies.
Social infrastructure, from my perspective, refers to sort of the networks and spaces that afford social connection. So there's an intentionality associated with those spaces and networks. They are designed typically to ensure people can connect with each other.
So think of social infrastructure as the invisible scaffolding of community life. It's not just about having buildings or parks. It's about creating the conditions where people can come together.
The more we can encourage connection, the more we build trust within our community. And that trust is really important in terms of enabling things to happen. If we trust our neighbors, we're more likely to help them out. And when we think about what's on the horizon with different crises potentially, it's really important for us to have those connections that bolster us from any sort of calamity, any sort of disruption, not unlike what we experienced during the pandemic.
Social infrastructure is a relatively new term, but one that cities are increasingly incorporating into their vocabulary. But what is social infrastructure? That word infrastructure, it matters. Just like we build roads to connect places, Troy says we need to invest in spaces that connect people. And that investment doesn't have to mean building new stadiums or massive public squares. Sometimes it's about reimagining what we already have.
You could argue any sort of physical infrastructure has some sort of social element to it. As we evolve in our thinking around cities, and particularly cities being designed for people, we might start to think about streets very differently and not think of them squarely as something that is car-centric and for getting around, but actually to connect people as well. One of the amazing things during the pandemic was the number of neighborhoods that took it upon themselves to shut down their streets to enable that sort of activity, that social activity that might otherwise not have happened. So it's interesting to think when people start to reimagine not just what we might think of as social infrastructure, but reimagine all infrastructure as having a social component to it.
So why does all this matter? Why should we care whether a sidewalk is just a sidewalk or a potential meeting place? Because, as Troy points out, these small points of connection add up to something bigger. They can even be life-saving. One of the first people to really focus their attention on the profound effect of social infrastructure was a man named Eric Kleinenberg. As a doctoral student, Eric studied the deadly 1995 Chicago heat wave that led to 739 heat-related deaths over 5 days. He found that in neighborhoods with strong social networks, far fewer people died. Why? Because people in these neighborhoods checked on each other. In areas without those social networks, people were left alone and death rates were higher.
When we think about connections being built, being maintained, being sustained, they have to happen somewhere. That could potentially be online, but I think we recognize that face-to-face interaction is particularly important in terms of building meaningful connections.
Interacting with the people around you in your community leads to enriched relationships that can be fulfilling and beneficial in the short and long term. But public spaces also create opportunities for us to connect with strangers in important ways. Sometimes we see strangers so frequently as we go about our daily routines that they become familiar to us. The neighbor who walks their dog down your street every day, the barista you see regularly but never speak to, or someone on your bus commute. We may not interact with familiar strangers directly, but their presence in our lives can be significant. Seeing and being seen by familiar strangers can give us a sense of safety and belonging, making a neighborhood feel less anonymous and threatening. It can reduce social anxiety and create a sense of predictability to have shared routines alongside others. Familiar strangers are one of the building blocks to greater connection and civic trust. It's what makes a neighborhood feel like a place you live in, rather than just a space you pass through. On his daily walk to work at the university, Troy regularly passes by a communal living house.
And there's a young man who sits out on the curb listening to his headphones. And years ago I was walking down the road and he waved to me. And it was one of those situations where I don't know who this guy is. So I kind of looked past my shoulder, around, is he waving at me? Sure enough, he was. So I kind of awkwardly waved back, continued with my day, walked to work. Well, since that day, and again, I'm not walking to work every day, but every time I walk to work, I see this young man out on the curb and he always waves to me. And in fact, I find myself now looking for him and waving back to him or initiating the wave, like maybe I'm the first to wave. And when I don't see him, I'm actually kind of concerned. Like, where is this guy? Is he okay? Have no idea what his name is. Never have had a conversation with him. And yet he's part of my neighborhood. He's part of my community. And, it just makes me feel like, I'm connected beyond just my insular social circle. And that connection is really important.
And here's the thing. Social infrastructure isn't just about making our communities friendlier, nicer places to live. It's increasingly being recognized as a public health issue.
According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 6 people feels chronically lonely. But very rarely do we point to the importance of our social connections in terms of advancing our own health and well-being. And yet, in the past 10 to 15 years, this enormous body of literature has come out to really underscore how vital those are for our health and well-being. In fact, in 2023, there was an interesting book published by 2 Harvard professors called The Good Life. And in it, they provided findings from the longest adult development study in the world, which is the Harvard Adult Development Study. It's been ongoing for, I guess, about 85 years now. So they were able to track different individuals over their lifespan. And the overwhelming finding from that study was that if there is one thing you can do to best address your health and well-being, it's to cultivate warm relationships of all kinds. And in fact, on June 30th, the WHO Commission for Social Connection essentially declared it to be a global crisis. As we recognize this crisis, I think we start to ask, what can we do to address it? And virtually across all announcements of this crisis is the notion that we need to invest more in social infrastructure.
Loneliness, then, isn't just a private struggle. It's a collective one. And investing in social infrastructure is one of the tools we have to respond to it. And the way we respond matters, because not everyone has access to social infrastructure equally.
I mean, in many ways, you could say that the inequity of the distribution of these spaces throughout any city is really an environmental justice issue, insofar as we all need access to these spaces. And if you think back to the pandemic, it was interesting because, somebody like me, I have a beautiful backyard where I had a space where I could engage in restorative activity, like I could enjoy that space with my family and friends. Whereas a lot of people who are using public spaces during the pandemic, and by public spaces, I mean parking lots, were people who lived in apartments with extended family. Often they were newcomers to this country, and they needed those spaces in which to just get outside, but also to connect with other people. And especially with this affordability crisis where there's such a push to build housing, but the push is so aggressive that in many ways it's failing to appreciate what makes a neighborhood a quality community in which to live. I think there's an effort to reduce the cost of building homes, which means a reduction in development charges, a reduction in parkland allocations. The challenge with that is that cities have fewer resources to invest in their public spaces, their parks, their open spaces, and that's can only be detrimental to neighborhoods. It's forced them to be more creative, but it means that we're probably in the future going to see more privately owned public spaces.
I don't want to give you the impression that the fate of your social infrastructure is up to governments and developers. When I asked Troy what role the average person living in the community has to influence what social infrastructure looks like, he lit up.
I think one of the cooler ideas in the area of urbanism is the idea of tactical urbanism. Tactical urbanism is an approach that is largely bottom up. You might think of it as guerrilla techniques, where people, residents, inhabitants of the region take it upon themselves to alter the landscape, asking for forgiveness as opposed to permission to doing things. It gets back to my idea of reimagining our landscape. We take for granted that streets have a singular purpose or that sidewalks have a singular purpose. It's up to folks to really think through how they can reimagine these spaces and to feel emboldened to make those changes themselves. And I think we can do that certainly even with my own property. I've been thinking more recently, like, what can I do to enliven people's experiences as they walk by my property? And there's lots of different strategies that people can take. They can naturalize an area, green it. They can convivialize a space. In other words, just simply putting chairs in a space invites people to sit down. It gives them the nudge that it's okay to do so, to hang out. You can colonize. So in other words, introduce food, food trucks, picnics, barbecues, street eateries, these sorts of things. You can aestheticize. In other words, you can think about ways you can implement art. There's so many really cool things that people do, like yard bombing. That's where, yarn bombing. And yarn bombing is where they knit, people just get together and they knit like cozies for fire hydrants or for trees. And that seems absurd, but it enables people to stop and have conversations. And it beautifies the environment.
But the joy we cultivate from creating whimsy in our neighborhood spaces can end up missing the point of creating connection if we don't consider who we're activating the space for. Who is included? Who isn't? Whether it's intentional or not.
The trouble with those guerrilla techniques is that while it seems really exciting to see that type of activity take place, and I love examples that arise around people engaging in tactical urbanism. The challenge with that is, first of all, when they do engage in that type of practice, there isn't always the thought that, say, a city would put into any alteration to a space. A city must, in many ways, think about all residents and how it's going to enable engagement with that space. Whereas when we take this upon ourselves to engage in this type of behavior, we're not always thinking about those things. I do think that people should be thinking about how they can appropriate and reimagine spaces, particularly in their neighborhood. But I think they just need to really be thinking about how inclusive can they be in doing so.
So social infrastructure is about more than bricks and mortar. It's about designing and using spaces in ways that make connection possible. Up next, we'll explore libraries, the steady and evolving cornerstones of our social infrastructure. In 2018, the entwined crises of city life were unavoidable. Inequality was growing, people felt more polarized in their politics and beliefs, and there was a general decline in civic life and participation. A sociologist named Eric Kleinenberg, the one who studied the deadly 1995 Chicago heat wave, published a book called Palaces for the People, where he urged readers to consider that we already had some of the most important tools to address these problems. social infrastructure, and chief among them, public libraries. Libraries are a prime example of social infrastructure. They're places that hold communities together in ways we can't always see, just as the tangle of municipal services under our roads are generally invisible to us while they make our daily lives function. Part of the power of libraries as social infrastructure is that they welcome everyone: newcomers, longtime residents, parents, seniors, students, even wanderers.
So I'm Harita. I need to take some books. This library have very good collection of books. Like, I'm very interested in history, so I came here to collect history books, some of them.
Do you come to the library often?
Yeah, I just live nearby. Yes, it's like mostly twice in a month or thrice in a month. Yeah. As you can see, I'm an international student, so if I want to know about anything nearby, or it's like there are so many events going on in library, I can just, even I'm a member, I can just attend and get to know about things.
More than just books, libraries are social hubs where you're welcome to loiter and hang out. That sense of welcome matters, because libraries are often one of the last truly public commons, places you can walk into without spending money, without needing a reason, without anyone asking why you're there.
So the role of the library is changing really, really quickly because the social fabric of our urban communities is changing really rapidly.
That's Nathan Stretch. He's the Senior Manager of Community Development and Insights at Kitchener Public Library.
So we're seeing more and more people who are dislocated from their communities. And that can be because they're new Canadians, or because they become unhoused, or because they're experiencing compounding complexities in their lives. You know, could be a health issue, could be trauma. They could be experiencing trauma, or they could be experiencing joy. Like, I don't want to just lean into that. You know, we've got all kinds of people making their way in the world and trying to figure out what's next for me. And the library is a place that accepts wanderers, whether they're lost or whether they're not. You don't have to declare to anyone what you're doing at the library when you walk in the front door, or you don't have to check in at the front desk and get a badge. You can come in and you can self-direct. You can get your hold, talk to nobody, and leave. Or you can come in and you can sit for the day and study. Or you can record in the studio, or you can make a connection with a service, or you can join a program. I had some students here to come experience this library, and they're international students and Canadian students and local students, people from Hong Kong, people from Ghana, people from Kitchener, and people from Canada wider. And they all told me later that they expected this place to be severe, quiet, individual working spaces, and had a lovely time playing within the tension of what their normative understanding of a library was and what the modern interplay of a library with a community actually is. And what they described really was social infrastructure. And the 3 levels of social infrastructure that the Gale Institute talks about are hubs, hangouts, and havens.
GAL is a global urban strategy and design consultancy. The self-proclaimed public space nerds at GAL spent a year touring social infrastructure in other countries around the world, and from that they developed a framework for understanding different types of social infrastructure. Havens, which are spaces to gather around shared identity for folks who need a safe communal space. Hubs, which are spaces to connect across different backgrounds. And hangouts, which are spaces for people of all backgrounds to just be.
And they described all 3 of those concepts happening here in the library. They came back to say there was art. It was really inspirational. I didn't expect that. There were little nooks in the library where people doing their own thing. It was really interesting. I saw services out in public space. Some of it looked like the library was doing it, but some of it looked like community partners were doing it. A number of them said, we saw young people in the space gathering, and they weren't super quiet, but they also weren't being shushed or shamed for working on their projects in the way that teenagers do. So people were really excited about that. And I think that that's really a good indication of what social infrastructure through the lens of a library is. This polyphony of use of a very intentional space.
If you've been to a library recently, you've probably noticed that libraries are changing. But at their core, libraries are still fundamentally a public commons.
It's one of the last places you can be where you're not expected to buy something or to contribute monetarily in a marketplace, right? Libraries are built on sharing resources, and that continues to be really core to our work. So that facilitates the opportunity for you to meet people that you might not meet, people who are already outside of the marketplace.
And those opportunities to share spaces with other people in the community in a way that makes you feel like you and they belong is a defining feature of social infrastructure. In fact, librarians use the term serendipity to talk about the way these unintentional connections happen amidst the shelves. Sometimes what you find in a library is not what you came looking for at all.
Like if you go into the stacks and you find the book you're looking for, you become interested in the book next to it. Oh, and the book next to it. And that's really positive and kind of unique. It opens you up for surprise without the danger that sometimes is associated with something unexpected happening, right? So it opens your mind, it cracks you open a little bit, but that libraries have also, and librarians and library workers and academics have extended this idea, partly because in response, honestly, to the proliferation of digital tools and media, to say that serendipity happens between people in the library as well. That you come to the library for one thing, but you might meet somebody that you didn't expect to meet. And that there's an energy and a beauty in that unexpected meeting. The idea that when you meet other people without preconceived notions, that something else might happen, and that you open to the surprise of that relationship, and that the surprise is where newness and meaning and sometimes even change happens.
Well, rural libraries are hubs of activity.
That's Cristina McLaren, Manager of Library Services for the region of Waterloo Libraries. They serve the region's rural communities in the townships.
The library is a great place to meet your neighbor or fellow community members. So they're really places where people can connect with one another. And we offer so many opportunities for that to happen organically. There's programs and events at the libraries. There's activities always happening. Or even if people are just stopping in to pick up their books or drop off their books that they've checked out. There are those opportunities for people to come across one another and have those conversations with one another. The Region of Waterloo Library branches, we have places for people to sit and to connect over a puzzle or a game. There's really no expectation of participation in a program or taking any items home. People can just come to the branches, do things, connect with other people, and then go home.
It turns out that the importance of libraries as key social infrastructure is pretty universal. But social infrastructure only works if it's adapted to the community in which it's located. So while both rural and urban libraries are hubs for social connection, they have to take into account the unique experiences of the people who live there.
Access to reliable transportation can be a barrier for rural residents. That limits opportunities for socializing. So, for example, a young family able to walk to their local branch for early literacy programming, like a storytime program, that provides a way for caregivers and children to socialize with others, maybe going through the same life experiences. But as I said, each town is a little different. But for some, the library is one of the only places where people can go for free, and being able to borrow resources and attend programs at no cost is really quite impactful, I think, in today's economy. Now, the library also offers some additional things that might help people as well. Regional Waterloo Library offers hotspots. So as we know, people in rural areas might not have access to reliable internet at home. So we offer hotspots that they can use to connect to the internet. Baby and early years programs are really fantastic at introducing new parents to one another, which is really important since they may be more socially isolated than people living in urban areas. busy urban communities, they like I said, have a lot more going on and more opportunities for people to be social, maybe at their local pool or arena or theater or auditorium, shops, and community events. But rural communities, they have some of these things as well, but on a smaller scale. And as I mentioned before, transportation could be a concern for rural residents. So there's a limit to the things that people may be able to partake in. So for example, just thinking of a household with one vehicle in a rural setting, that allows for one parent to attend work during the day, but the other parent who is home caring for children or caring for an elderly family member, they need proximity to be able to walk to those public spaces or those community services. And that may be more difficult in a rural community where there are fewer services within walking distance. So rural libraries are really places for people to gather and make those social connections.
From rural towns to bustling cities, libraries are the spaces where difference meets common ground, where wanderers and neighbors alike find connection amongst the shelves.
Tom Connolly. I returned a DVD because I actually used the library to find some obscure movies. This was a Korean movie that I read was really good, and they had it. And I've also taken out digital pianos to play at home, and books, of course.
So why would you say the library is important to you?
It's important because it makes, number one, free information for everyone. It's very egalitarian. KPL especially, I know, has a lot of social programs that they run here, a lot of opportunity for people that are unhoused, the LGBT community, all that.
Some social connections, like the invisible ties to familiar strangers, can be unexpected. But the way social infrastructure impacts our well-being isn't always so passive. Sometimes the connections that come out of social infrastructure are because people are using the space to foster connection. Troy Glover, our local expert on social infrastructure, tells us why this is important.
There's also a role for what's called continuous placemaking. The idea that that space, is going to never be fixed and static. It's always going to be a dynamic space. So it's the people who are going to bring that dynamism to it. And we can nudge them along by providing different elements to it that encourages them to connect.
Libraries can be used in a lot of different ways. Some uses are self-serve, like grabbing a quiet corner or hosting a group project at a study table. Others are more intentional, like when the library partners with outside organizations to meet needs they couldn't fill alone.
So we want to partner with groups that can work in the space to meet that need, but also that can work within our values and structures. We're looking for partnerships in the truest sense of the word, that we validate one another, that we image market together, and that expands the service of a library in ways that we can't.
That's Nathan again from the Kitchener Public Library, where they are no stranger to partnerships. Partnerships and programs are only one piece of the puzzle. Cristina, who oversees the region's library branches, points out that staff are often the frontline builders of social connection.
Our branch staff do a really fantastic job of creating warm, welcoming spaces. We have a program team that goes out and does programming in each of our locations, and they respond to requests for special programming that draws people into the branches and encourages folks to get to know each other.
Across the region's branches, these programs look different. In Bloomingdale, seniors connect while picking up their book holds. In New Hamburg and Breslau, it's community-driven groups like yarn crafts or chess clubs. St. Jacobs is piloting visits to long-term care. Clyde offers a pop-up library for an isolated rural area. And sometimes something as simple as showing up for a program can transform strangers into friends.
When we first started doing programs in St. Clement's, everyone who attended were strangers to each other, but now they're friends and they come to the programs as much to see one another as they do to partake in the activity.
What ties all these stories together is responsiveness. Staff don't just wait for people to walk in. They listen, they experiment, they adapt.
I think it's that staff are seeing what and hearing what the needs are from existing patrons and from their contacts within the community. But I think we're also trying new things, right? We're trying different programs and just seeing what will stick and what people will be interested in.
Fostering an open and responsive space like a library comes with challenges. Urban branches like the Central Branch of the Kitchener Public Library in downtown Kitchener sit at the intersection of overlapping social crises.
I think that libraries, and this library in particular, have been very good at developing a response in cooperation with the polyphony of services that surround the library. And Kitchener is maybe unique in the sense that our central library in the downtown urban core is surrounded by really innovative, flexible, multifaceted community services who don't demand that the library replicate their services. They don't demand that we be a safe use space or an overnight shelter, but that we do our part in the community to meet the needs of a precariat group. So we've been able, with their help, I think, to develop a library response that is becoming quite resolute. This is now part of our work. We're not asking someone else to do it. We've taken it on. We've learned through the process. And we're willing to share what we've learned.
Sometimes that means offering services you might not expect at a library, like a health clinic.
We offer a clinic downstairs through community health caring for unhoused, underhoused, and precarious individuals. And at the same time as that program happens, our community connections team, our well-being and community connections team, runs a drop-in that acts as a waiting room for that clinic. But it also effectively obscures what's happening in that room so that people can come to the library with a modicum of anonymity. But the library offers a unique opportunity for individuals to access basic necessities of life and health and services without declaring or even having to kind of wrestle with who they might be seen as in the community.
And in rural communities, one of the biggest challenges remains letting people know what's happening in the first place. In fact, in our region, rural libraries have had the hardest time recovering from the effects of the pandemic and getting people back out to the library.
Getting the word out about everything that the library offers is really one of our biggest challenges. But there's always a need for more ways to reach people and to tell them about the services and programs available at each of our library branches.
So why should we care about all this? Why does social infrastructure matter?
A thriving community requires strong social connections among inhabitants. If we don't have social infrastructure open to everyone, then we rely on private spaces to fulfill that function, but keeps out the very people who probably need connection more than anybody else.
According to the 2025 Vital Signs report from the Waterloo Region Community Foundation, Waterloo Region is Canada's fastest growing metropolitan area. That's astounding. It's expected that more than 1 million people will live here by 2050. What will that mean for our social infrastructure? To some extent, it will depend on how we collectively imagine it should feel to live in that future community. We know that people who use more social infrastructure report higher life satisfaction. But do we agree that things like improved life satisfaction, reduced loneliness and social division, and greater civic participation are worth the investment? Libraries are one of the most frequently used social infrastructure in the community, right after parks. What will it look like when our libraries are regularly meeting the needs of 1 million residents or more? Libraries are more than buildings. They're a testing ground for the future, a place where communities practice meeting each other across differences and prepare for what comes next.
We still need libraries, but we need libraries to be what they need to be in the moment. We need libraries to arrive on time with the rest of us.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks to our guests on today's show, Troy Glover, Nathan Stretch, and Cristina McLaren. Coming up next time on Community by Design, we look at how town squares help shape belonging in our communities. You can find links to resources mentioned in today's show in the show notes, including the 2025 Vital Signs Report and the Gell Institute's framework on hubs, havens, and hangouts. If you're looking for ideas on how to activate your neighborhood, Troy suggests heading to activateyourneighborhood.ca. You can enjoy all episodes of this show by visiting midtownradio.ca or downloading the Midtown Radio app. Community by Design is produced by me, Jay Harrison. Our roving reporter is Karen Atkins. This episode was written by myself and Karen and edited by Darren Atkins and Srijit Ramaswamy. The music in today's show was from Rocket Jr., Par Hagstrom, and Loyer, courtesy of Epidemic Sound. Our executive producer is David Harms. This show was made possible by the support of the Waterloo Region Community Foundation and listeners like you. Visit midtownradio.ca to hear more local programming and find out how you can contribute to uplifting local musicians and community voices.